Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Dana's Aesthetics. In this series, I go through all kinds of ways that I use the elements of art, the principles of design, and how they all combine into the way that my artwork ends up. And hopefully, by doing that, I give you the tools to use those principles and elements and all the things we talk about in your own artwork so that you can better tell your own story. So today we are going to talk about materials, and I have been contemplating materials and different types of materials and how they play a role in artwork pretty much since I started making art. And I want to really focus on the fact that when artists use material, there's something embedded in each material that is its own kind of inherent quality. And really, when I talk to my students about materials, I try to instill in them that they should use the material for its qualities and not try to make it something that it's not. For instance, if you were painting in watercolors and you really just wanted to make it look very stylized like a woodcut, then you are probably not going to be successful. It's really hard to make that flowy watercolor look like a harsh, kind of graphic woodcut. So instead, you could use, another type of material. You could use woodcut, you could use linoleum, you could use screen printing even, but, don't try to make a material into something that it's not. Use it for the qualities that it has. And this is like a huge kind of concept that I try to tell all my students because number one, you don't want to get frustrated thinking about trying to force something to be what it's not. And number two, there are so many different inherent qualities in each type of material and media that you can only achieve through that media. So why not use the right medium for the job? Sometimes it's when I'm creating art or thinking about what piece to create, I instinctively go to a material because I know what its properties are and what it's going to end up looking like. For instance, encaustic. I know that encaustic has a type of translucency. It has a type of luminosity that not a lot of other art media has. And so if I want that type of look, then I'm going to go to encaustic. That being said, there are ways that I can achieve a similar look and feel with transparency and luminosity using either plexiglass that I've sanded and kind of surfaced and scratched into. It has a similar feel. It's not exactly the same because it's not the same media, but I can kind of think about my work as a whole and use some of the kind of concepts that I'm working with and the look that I want to get in different media. So if I was going to try to achieve kind of these layers of transparent and translucent, panels, or the depth that I can get in encaustic, then, obviously I'm not printing on wax, but I could, for instance, use the wax and do monotypes, and that actually gives kind of a similar look, but not quite. Instead, what I might want to do is think about other materials that have a similar transparent and translucent quality that I could layer as paper. So I've used things like transparent silk organza, or transparent Duralar, which is like a sort of a film that's used for drafting that's got a frosty or a clear sheen to it. I've used Japanese kind of thin rice or mulberry papers. And by thinking about what I ultimately want to achieve, which would be that kind of transparent layering, I can then choose materials that have that quality. And I'm not fighting against my concepts, and I'm not fighting against the material. So, that's all to say that you think about your concept and what you want to achieve first, how that story is going to be told, and then you can choose your materials, or at least it will give you a guide as to, which materials would work best for that. Another way that I use material is I will kind of start with a material like watercolor, and I'll let the medium kind of guide me. And here I'm talking about material and media interchangeably. So if I start with a media like watercolor, then often I will explore its properties and see how I want to use it and where it would be best in one of my pieces. And I very strongly suggest that even if you're not new to a material, that you do sketches, that you do tests, that you kind of explore the material without having a preconceived idea first about what it's going to end up being and how it's going to end up looking, because in that way you'll really treat it for what it is. And you'll learn all kinds of different things about the material. For instance, that watercolor is water soluble. So even after you put it down on paper, you can get it wet and it will remove or erase, which is good and bad. It's very flowy and fluid, obviously, but it can also be made to be more opaque. But it's very good for layering. It's transparent. So, exploring all these different properties of a material will give you either ideas for how to add it to a piece or a series, or maybe it'll make you change your mind and say, watercolor is just not for me. It's not the aesthetic I'm going for. I'm going to try something else, maybe more opaque, like gouache or collage or acrylic. And it will, trying all these materials either in a sketchbook or just in a painting that is like your sampler painting, will really be helpful to guide you into when and how to use the material. I've also really started to look at kind of mixed media. I've always been a huge fan of mixing materials together, but in a way that, again, is led by my concept. So I am really into painting and printmaking, but I'm also into knitting and sewing and textiles. And not only do I like to do those things, I like to knit and I like to weave and sew, but it's also a part of the story that I'm telling. So, for instance, I will paint one of the symbols from my Baltic heritage onto an encaustic painting. But maybe that's not the best way to translate that idea onto paper. Maybe it's better to embroider or stitch the symbol onto the paper because I can stitch through paper. These types of things. So, thinking about incorporating materials that might not be in your art arsenal is also a way that I like to mix it up, mix media, but also deepen the story that I'm telling. Also, don't be afraid to learn new things, explore a new media. I was very hesitant to use an iPad or digital work because I thought, oh, it's not hands-on. I can't feel it. I can't get my hands dirty. It's not physical. But I found that it is a really good way to not only create when I don't have my art supplies, but also a way to kind of see that layering again that I'm really drawn to. And I can take an existing print that I have or a photograph, and I can layer on the digital drawing that simulates the physical media pretty well. And it's kind of been fun to explore how to manipulate that material, because it is a material and it does take skill and practice to kind of figure out. And it's interesting how my perception has changed about that media after having used it. So if you're kind of thinking about using a material but haven't yet, then maybe this is your opportunity to try it. Or if you're hesitant to try something because you have either a stigma against it, or you don't want to invest in something like encaustic, then I would encourage you also to get beyond that barrier, because either way, you'll demystify it. You'll either say, yeah, that's not for me, and maybe donate or sell your supplies to some other artist. Or you'll say, wow, this is really cool, and I kind of sensed that I was gonna enjoy this and make it part of my practice, and I have. So I hope that's helped clarify kind of why I do use materials the way that I do in my artwork, and also helped you to get some ideas on how you can use materials and have a mindset about materials and media in your own work.